Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Pacific Northwest Sports Week 8. I'm so excited to give you an update. Now, there's some really long summaries in here. There's some really short ones, so I apologize. It's a little bit of a mixed bag, but I think there's some really good things to touch on. There's also some games in here, as you will see later, that just weren't even close to being competitive. So we start off with Wazoo against Hawaii, who won 42-10. Now, the game kind of started off weird for Wazoo. They drove on down the fields, had a turnover on downs. Then they didn't convert on fourth down, or then they scored, and then they punted. So first three drives went turnover on downs, score, punt, and you kind of thought, is Wazoo going to be able to settle into this game? Because Hawaii likes to throw the ball around. Wazoo actually leads, is in the bottom half in the NCAA and missed tackles according to Pro Football Focus. So you never want to watch something like that happen. Now, I think it's only right that we discuss playoffs because as of yesterday morning, Wazoo had anywhere between a 20 to 25% chance of making the college football playoffs, which is amazing. But for those of you who don't know how that works, 4 seeds of the 12 are determined by the P4 champions. So you're looking at the SEC, the Big 12, the Big 10, and the ACC. Now, nowhere does it guarantee that those 4 conference champions are guaranteed the top 4 seats. For instance, somehow, some way, you could have Iowa beating Oregon for the Big 10 conference championship. Again, somehow, some way, let's go with theoretically here. If that happens, and Oregon continues to dominate for the rest of the year, I imagine it's going to be really hard for the College Football Playoff Committee to say, yeah, they had one slip-up against one defensively good team. They don't get a top 4 seed. They very well could. But all this is to say the top 4 seeds are not guaranteed to anyone. It's simply the 4 conference champions get 4 seeds. From there, there's one more guaranteed seed, and that goes to the highest ranked group of 5 football team. So, for example, the Sun Belt, the American, the Mountain West Conference, whoever is the highest ranked team. So if 2 teams from those conferences, from the Sun Belt and the Mountain West, go undefeated, whoever is the highest ranked by the College Football Playoff Committee, which rankings I believe start coming out in week 8 or 9, whoever's the highest ranked one from there will get that spot. So that's another good thing to realize. Now, I personally, the next 7 are just up to the College Football Playoff Committee. And so for me, I personally believe 1 or 2 more G5 teams will always be able to sneak in just for competitive sake. Take, for example, Army and Navy this year. They very well could both end up getting in if one of them ends up undefeated and one of them ends up with a loss to the other. But Notre Dame is still on the schedule, so hold your breath there a little bit. So Wazoo potentially could sneak in. But the issue is their alliance with the Mountain West Conference made it so that they are not eligible for the Mountain West Conference Championship, making it almost impossible for them to get in, especially after they lost to Boise State, who, when you look back on it, that will be the best team they played, and that's going to be a really tough one. But there's still a 20% chance, so you never really know what's going to happen. Now, let's also just give a shout out to those helmets they wore because, wow, they looked amazing. And when you look that good, you play good, and they looked just fantastic. My favorite helmets that Wazoo's done in however long, as you can see by the collection, it truly is my favorites. Now, your player of the game, John Mateer, who went 23 of 27 for 395 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also rushed 8 times for 45 yards and 2 touchdowns. WSU plays San Diego State next week. Now, your Eastern Washington Eagles played UC Davis, and they lost 38-48. Now, football game is 4 quarters, and you need to play all 4 quarters to win. Saturday, the Eagles only played 3 quarters, and they led by 3 points after the first quarter. But then in the second, they gave up 21 points. And you can't win games when your defense goes MIA like that. The Eagles play against Idaho next week. Over to Central Washington, your Central Washington Wildcats beat Texas A&M Kingsville 31-0, their second shutout of the year. That's quick striking offense and amazing defense is all Central needed as they dominated Kingsville. The first quarter was close and included a blocked field goal to keep the game at 0-0. But after a big stop on the next drive, Central only needed one play to score, and from there, they were on a boat race and cruised to that win. Player of the game, quarterback Kennedy McGill, 10 of 12, 193 yards and 2 touchdowns, also rushed 16 times for 90 yards. Central plays Midwestern State next week. Your Pacific Lutheran Lutes played Willamette and won 50-0. Now, PLU came out scoring on five of their first 6 drives, and then it looked like Willamette could get some points on the board, but their field goal was blocked. PLU gets the easy win. Player of the game, quarterback Darius Chafin, 17 of 21 for 254 yards and 3 touchdowns. PLU plays Lewis and Clark next week, and Willamette plays George Fox next week. Now over to your Puget Sound Loggers, who played Whitworth 24-42. Now, Puget Sound was up 9-0, and honestly, it looked like they could knock off a top 25 ranked team in Whitworth. But good teams do what good teams do. They took a punch in the mouth, they adjusted, they came back, and they dominated. Simple as that. And they scored 20 points in the third quarter alone. Player of the game, I truly have to give it to 2 of them. Wide receiver Nathan Owens had 6 receptions for 133 yards and 2 touchdowns. And their other wide receiver, Evan Lingest, had 4 receptions for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, your Oregon Duck, we'll over to Oregon, where your Oregon Ducks played Purdue and won 35-0. Just keep rolling. That's all Oregon really has to do, and that's exactly what they did. Now, Purdue has a history of upsetting teams coming off emotional wins when they come to their place. But you're coming off a huge win, you have a huge spread in the game, and you just had a wacky upset. All of those things were checked off. This screamed trap game. And what does Oregon go out and do? They go out and absolutely dominating. Now, it might have not been their greatest execution, but it was still impressive. Player of the game, Jordan James, 10 rushes, 50 yards, 2 touchdowns. Oregon has a tough game next week as they play a very fundamentally sound team in Illinois. Now, Oregon State Beavers played UNLV and lost 25-33. It's a tough loss for OSU. They are far from perfect, but you expect a bit more out of them. OSU plays Cal next week. Now, your Portland State Vikings played Montana State, and they lost 14-44. Complete domination by the Bobcats. And it's what you expect. They start the season off 8-0, their 3rd time in program history. Player of the game, quarterback Tommy Mellett. 15 of 20 for 239 yards and 3 touchdowns. This is the first time I saw him play as a quarterback, and he wasn't as dynamic of a runner. I truly saw him sit in the pocket and make throws, which it's something that you want to see, because if the rushing aspect is gone from you, you want to know that you can get stuff done through the air, and he did that. Portland State has a bye next week. MSU has a bye next week as well. Your Western Oregon Wolves played Texas Permian Basin and won 30-27. Now, the Wolves continue to win and be the darling of the Lone Star Conference. Now, the Wolves trailed 14-0 after the first quarter, only to score 20 points in the second quarter. It wouldn't last long as Texas Permian Basin would score 13 unanswered and leaves the Wolves 27-20 with about 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And here's where we take over. From there, the Wolves ran 4 consecutive rushes for 32 yards and score a touchdown to tie up the game. Now, overtime comes and Western Oregon is on defense first. 3rd and 9 from the Wolves 14. Texas Permian Basin says we're going to take a shot to the end zone. If we can't get there, we're going to go ahead and kick our field goal. Not so fast, as cornerback Tyler Copeland intercepts a pass in the end zone. Then the Wolves get the ball back, run the ball to the University of Texas Permian Basin's 11, where a true freshman kicker, Keaton Emmett, made his field goal to win it for the Wolves. I wanted to mention, the Wolves had the ball for 40 minutes in this game. That is crazy time-controlled football. Player of the game, Dominique Loggins, 25 rushes for 138 yards. Western Oregon will play Texas A&M University Kingsville next week. Now, your George Fox Bruins played against Linfield and lost 7-47. Linfield cruised to this win. After leading 30-7 at halftime, they then came in the third and ran 25 plays to the Bruins 7, taking a 37-7 lead into the fourth quarter. From there, they put in the backups and let them finish it off. Player of the game, this Linfield defense.
George Fox plays Willamette next week, and Linfield plays Puget Sound next week. Your Lewis and Clark Pioneers played Pacific University and won 51-37. Now, they went 51 points and 622 yards. They scored on 5 of their 6 first drives, and Pacific put up a fight, putting up 20 in the third, but at that point, the damage was done. Player of the game, Devin Guest, 8 receptions, 236 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Pacific plays Whitworth next week. Lewis and Clark plays PLU next week. Your Eastern Oregon Mountaineers played Carroll and lost 19-24. Do not let the score confuse you. Carroll was in control the whole game. They started up 10-0. They gained 481 yards on offense, and it really just, the score does not indicate the competitiveness of the game. Eastern Oregon plays Simpson next week, and Carroll plays College of Idaho next week. Your Southern Oregon Raiders played Arizona Christian and won 48-7. Now, all you need to know about this game, Southern Oregon came away with 5 takeaways and compiled 510 yards of offense. It was simple, just like some of these summaries. Player of the game, Gunnar Yates, 18 rushes, 148 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Yates became the 3rd player in team history to finish in 21 years to finish with 20 or more rushing touchdowns in a year. Southern Oregon will play MSU Northern next week. Now, over to Idaho, where your Idaho Vandals played Cal Poly and won 34-29. Now, this game sounds close, and the first half was. But in the third quarter, Idaho exploded for 21 points. Then in the fourth quarter, they would score again to be up 34-16. After this, Cal Poly would score some garbage time touchdowns to make the game seem closer. Player of the game, Jack Wagner, had his career day, 17 of 23, 347 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Idaho plays Eastern next week. Now, Idaho State Bengals played Northern Arizona University and lost 26-30. It's a tough loss. ISU plays Sacramento State next week. Hopefully, they can get something going. College of Idaho, the Coyotes, played MSU Northern and won 28-7. Now, Northern actually scored first, and then the Yotes would respond and wouldn't allow them on the board, but somehow it just wasn't as dominant of a win. Perhaps it was the choppiness of the game. Perhaps it was the pedestrianness of it. It felt choppy. That's the way to put it. And I think it was from the drop balls. As you can see, player of the game, Andy Peters, 23 of 37. Still a good game. 349 yards and 2 touchdowns. College of Idaho plays Carroll next week. MSU Northern plays Southern Oregon next week. Now over to Montana, where your Montana Western Bulldogs played Rocky Mountain and won 42-24. Now, the Bulldogs truly looked like a top 10 team, and they got their win without their head coach. The Bulldogs ran the ball, and they ran it well. But the game was tied up early in the second quarter at 7-7, and the Bulldogs couldn't really slow down the passing attack of Rocky Mountain. That's why this game feels as close as it was. Player of the game, Jake Humphrey, 20 rushes, 220 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Rocky Mountain plays another tough game at Montana Tech next week, and Montana Western will play Arizona Christian next week. Now, your Montana Tech Orediggers played Simpson and won 97-0. Yes, you heard that right. 3 points shy of 100, 97-0. They took back the opening kickoff for a touchdown, and from there, clearly they cruised. It was a program record in points scored. Montana Tech has actual competition next week when they go and they face Rocky Mountain. Wyoming played against San Jose State University and lost 14-24. We knew this was going to be a tough one. Now we got to react to what it was and bounce back. Perhaps Wyoming can pick up win number 2 next week when they play Utah State University. Now over in Utah, your BYU Cougars played Oklahoma State and they won 38-35. BYU with a nice win, proving they can be clutch. And to be honest, I thought if BYU allows more than 25 points to any sort of team, there's no way they can get a win because their offense just isn't that good. But after seeing this offense perform the way they did to finish this game, I truly think BYU can compete with any team in the NCAA. Now let's get into this. BYU was leading by 3 when Oklahoma State had the ball. Oklahoma State went down the field and scored a touchdown with about 1:13 left on the clock. And even then, it might have been less time. But thanks to some timely clock management by BYU's head coach, Kalani Sitake, they got the ball back, marched down the field, and they couldn't just kick a field goal. They were down by 4. So they needed a touchdown to end this game. They got it. Thanks to Jake Retzlaff throwing a 35-yard dot on an absolute amazing route, a post to be exact, they scored their touchdown and won the game. Player of the game, LJ Martin, 20 attempts, 120 yards, and 2 touchdowns. BYU plays UCF next week. Now, Utah Utes played against TCU and they lost 7-13. This is another tough loss, and Wilson's going to be a good quarterback. But right now, he's just not the guy. The Utes play Houston next week. Utah State Aggies play against New Mexico, and they lost 45-50. And again, I'm really brief when I make these summaries for teams that lose because I want to focus on the winners. Utah State should have won. They allowed 21 points in the fourth quarter. Utah Tech Trailblazers played Austin PA and lost 7-13. Are they going to get a win this year? We're going to have to wait to find out. They have a chance next week when they play Eastern Kentucky. Then the Weber State Wildcats play against Sacramento State, and they lost 48-51. Now this one's got to sting. It's another high-scoring affair that Weber State just couldn't quite get out. Weber State has a bye next week. Now, let's go over your Week 9 opponents so we can just get these in real quick. So, your UW Huskies play Indiana. Your Wazoo Cougars play San Diego State. Your Eastern Washington Eagles play Idaho. Your Central Washington Wildcats play Midwestern State. Your PLU Lutes play Lewis and Clark. Your Puget Sound Loggers play Linfield. Your Whitworth Pirates, play Pacific. In Oregon, you have your Ducks playing Illinois. Beavers playing Cal. Portland State's on a bye. Western Oregon playing Texas A&M University Kingsville. George Fox playing Willamette. Eastern Oregon playing Simpson. Southern Oregon playing MSU Northern. In Idaho, you have Boise State playing UNLV. This is going to be an amazing, amazing game. Winner of this, probably winning the Mountain West Conference. UNLV has a very cool offense called the Go-Go offense. If you haven't looked into it, I suggest you do. Imagine Flexbone being put into the shotgun and putting 2 running backs to one side and then motioning to get the kind of options you want. Lots of RPOs, lots of unique triple option type things, play action heavy. UNLV was also the team that had their starting quarterback lost to allegedly promised NIL. Their backup comes in, Haj Malik Willis, and plays out of his mind. He's doing extremely well. So that's going to be a really, really cool game for people to pay attention to. Your Idaho State Bengals play Sacramento State. Your College of Idaho Yotes play Carroll. Over in Montana, we have the Grizzlies playing Northern Colorado. The Montana Western Bulldogs playing Arizona Christian University. Your Montana Tech Orediggers playing Rocky Mountain. Your Wyoming Cowboys play Utah State University. Utah has their BYU Cougars playing UCF. Utah Utes play Houston. Utah Tech Trailblazers play Eastern Kentucky. And Southern Utah Thunderbirds play University of West Georgia. As always, feel free to reach out. I truly enjoy doing this, and I want to make sure we can keep giving you updates. I will say I can't guarantee that I will have weekend updates with you guys next week. I do have some things going on that I'm going to keep private for right now. But if I can give you guys an update, I will be sure to do my best. If not, check out X. We'll have updates on there. Other than that, have a great day, guys. I will talk to you soon.